right, now one thing the book talked about was development proceeds. Does it proceed like smoothly, continuously? Or does it move, that's B here, or does it move kind of more what you call categorically, like leaps and bounds? One way to think about it is, are you the same person you were when you were 4 years old? I mean, do you think you're just like, is it just baby steps along the way that it's kind of continuous, who you are now versus who you were when you were 4? Or in fact, at some point, would you say you've become a different person altogether, whether it's because of social development or cognitive development? Thoughts on that? What do you got? Well, let's take a poll. How many people would agree with A? Development proceeds through stages, that is qualitatively, so that the individual changes rather abruptly into a different kind of person than she was in an earlier stage. How many people would agree with that? Show of hands. Okay, a few, not too many. How about B? Development proceeds continuously in small increments without abrupt changes of distinct changes. Which theorist that we read about would say what Bridget just said? Piaget. Meaning his whole theory is about cognitive development, and that, you know, if you look at infants, preschoolers, elementary school, and then adolescents, you know, you can see qualitative differences in the way they think. And not that the initial change, you know, the initial change comes maybe in a small step, like they're exposed to something, or some moment they have a kind of ta-da experience where they reinterpret their events, but then they go back, as Bridget was saying, and they kind of reorganize everything. So, for example, well, the other quiz question we had, right? The one about buying the daddy the gift was, and that was an example of Piaget's theory, which is the 3-year-old who Piaget would call egocentric, and that's not egocentric in a selfish way like we think of it, but egocentric in a kind of a cognitive perspective-taking way, which is they buy things for daddy that they like, because they assume it's going to make daddy happy, as opposed to being able to kind of do the mental gymnastics of seeing, well, maybe people have different likes and dislikes than I do. And so if you can think about this, you know, when the kid finally recognizes one day that, oh, daddy likes shirts and ties, and I like baseballs and trucks, and mommy likes, you know, whatever, then all of a sudden they might start applying that to everything, such that their whole kind of cognitive structures are being changed around significantly. And he would call that a qualitative difference, so that we think differently now than we did before. It also depends, I think, on what we're talking about. I mean, in terms of physical development, certainly there's qualitative change. Adolescence, prior to adolescence, for females, no breasts. Past adolescence, breasts. For males, no pubic hair, then pubic hair. So, you know, when it comes to biology, there clearly are some kind of biological unfoldings that occur throughout development of things that kind of weren't there and then all of a sudden are there. Or in other circumstances are the degree to which they're there, but there are some things that seem to be there or not there. Locke believed the infant is what? B. Tabula rasa. Here's another question. Was this in the book? People are good at that? But it's related to this, like when Locke was writing, it was actually kind of a dialogue which was related to religion, about whether infants are basically good and humans are basically good, or are they bad, or are they nothing? Are they blank slates, which is what Locke argued. When you think of it, when you think of like evolutionary theory, and it depends what you mean by selfish. If you think of evolutionary theory, you know, survival of the fittest. Well, we exist to pass our genes on. And actually, there's been a change in evolutionary theory from believing in the survival of the fittest, which people often kind of misinterpret as meaning, well, we're out to, like, for ourselves. that we're out to gain things for ourselves. Well, sociobiologists in the last 20, 30 years have been talking about, well, actually, we're not out for ourselves. We're out for our offspring. So that, in fact, is kind of a doing for others. Now, it's selfish. In fact, there's a book called The Selfish Gene, meaning, and the point is that the genes, our genes, are kind of selfish in that they just want to keep surviving. And that's kind of what evolution is. It's what makes for survival. Well, one of the things that makes for survival of genes is caring for our offspring. And so there's a sense in which, and it's a little bit controversial, but if you think about like empathy, caring for others, there's a sense in which we are all born with different levels of empathy. And there's a guy named Martin Hoffman who's done studies with infants, kind of the first couple weeks of life, and showing their reactions to hearing somebody else crying, and showing the kids kind of have a natural empathic reaction to that. Or if I was walking and went like this, wow, I actually missed, so it wasn't very effective. But you all would probably each have, I mean, if I did it more effectively, kind of a natural impulse of sympathy for me. For many of you would. Well, that seems to be an impulse we have, and that seems evolutionarily to have helped us survive. We have this empathic trait that looks out for our offspring. Now, of course, so kind of back to Aaron. Aaron's point was that, well, but even things that look good, pro-social, helpful, maybe have selfish kind of motivations. And that would be, if you look at it evolutionarily, maybe an example of that, which is even if we have this empathic trait, ultimately the motivation is selfish in that we want our genes to survive. I mean, we're not thinking that, but that's what an evolutionary theorist would say. Certainly, we also are born with emotions of anger and sadness, but anger isn't necessarily a bad emotion. Anger is actually a pretty good emotion most of the time. It's only when it's kind of uncontrolled, as Dimitri said, that it's bad. Anger is what makes us stand up to people that do things wrong to us. So it's a good thing, like lower levels of anger, frustration, things like that. It can motivate us to do good things. So anyway, I would say we kind of have both good and bad things. What happens at an early stage in the development of a chick embryo? The piece of tissue is surgically removed and placed at the tip of the wing bud. Yeah, a wing grows if it's done early. So today, and then we'll continue on Monday after the quiz, I want to give you kind of an overview of some points about this course and about child development in general. And the first point is up on the screen, and that is that in this course we'll predominantly be talking about and reading about child development in America, or you might say Western culture, at the beginning of the 21st century. Okay. The thing, and the book and I will sometimes we'll talk about differences. We've kind of already talked about some today. We'll point out differences about when, there's differences in terms of how kids develop or how parenting maybe doesn't have the same impact on kids here as it does elsewhere or vice versa. What are the stages of development? What are in early life? What do we call the different things like different parts of childhood? What are the names we have for them? Adolescence. Infancy. Toddler. What else?
Prenatal.
Prenatal period, very good.
Youth.
Who said prenatal?
Huh?
You said prenatal?
Yeah.
Okay, and your name?
Pamika?
Pamika?
Yeah.
Pamika says prenatal. I like people who think about prenatal period. What else? Often forgotten part of how prenatal period is very important. We'll talk about prenatal. We'll read about it and talk about it in about 2 weeks, week and a half. But we often forget about how important the care, in terms of even for outcomes later in life, how much prenatal care is. Yeah.
Preteen or youth?
Preteen or youth, yeah, we can call it childhood and youth. Although youth are often used, I think, to describe adolescence as well. And then people split childhood into like early childhood, which toddler might be a part of. Typically early, middle, and late childhood. One of these doesn't exist in a lot of societies. Which one? Adolescence. Especially pre-literate cultures. There's no kind of, as soon as puberty hits, they become adults. Well, the change adolescence as we know it didn't really exist until the 19th century. In fact, even kind of the late 19th century. Immigrants in America, immigrants coming into America were taking a lot of the jobs that kids, what we would think of now as adolescents, that the kids in the adolescent years were taking. And additionally, there was an increased demand for specialization and knowledge required for certain jobs. So going to school and learning certain things became increasingly important for the workforce. So school became mandatory in the 19th century, which created a whole kind of peer culture. Now kids were staying until they were 17, 18, staying in school. So all of a sudden you had a peer culture, an adolescent teenage culture that didn't exist, or at least not in that form previously. And people talk about college and even graduate school as an extended adolescence. We define adulthood as taking on kind of adult roles, job roles. Well, you guys are kind of, and it kind of sounds bad maybe, but it's not necessarily bad. Extended adolescence, where you're kind of, Eric Erickson talked about like identity formation. That's kind of the job of adolescent period. It's figuring out who you're going to be, both personally and in terms of job, and who your friends are going to be, what you're going to stand for. Well, now we have people, switching majors, how many times, even going to grad school, and they're still not sure what they're going to do with their life. We've kind of, time going to school, both college and grad school, is kind of you're self-absorbed in a sense, and that sounds bad, but it's not necessarily bad. We've kind of made life better for kids in the sense that there's a longer period where they get to kind of like learn stuff, and it's about them learning stuff. We're not expecting them to produce so much yet. I mean, you'll be expected to produce soon. Your parents will expect you to produce when you finish college. And the fact that you guys are all here at UMBC hanging out with people your own age. As soon as you go out in the workforce, you're going to be sitting next to, many of you, a computer terminal with somebody who's 45 or even older. And so this whole culture of people the same age who, and that kind of breeds like a culture to itself that wouldn't exist if we didn't have so many people going to school in large groups. So you can kind of see how culture influences child development, or at least how we think about child development. And if we were in a different society in the world, even currently, or 100 years ago in America, we might think of these stages of child development very differently, and how we should treat children at different ages very differently. The point is, in America, unlike, and not just America, but Western culture, we typically keep when the kids can finally sleep through the night, or even sooner in some cases, we try to move our kids into different rooms. And when we talk, when there's a study with a sociologist talking to American moms, well, why do they do that? Well, they want to give kids a sense of their own space. Don't want them to be dependent on us, see us all the time. Wanted to give them their own room so they had a sense of their own place. Compared to, say, this study I'm thinking of, the sociologist looked at Mayan moms they slept with their infants in the same bed for 3 years. And again, it relates to the point about collectivist versus more individualistic societies. When we think about child development, and as we will in this course, and what is the best parenting techniques and the way we should treat our kids, that's always influenced by the question, what do we want for our children? What kind of child do we want to produce, both individually for ourselves, but also for as a society? What are the kind of traits and values that we value? All right, so I just wanted to make a few beginning points about that, about kind of the course and how this course is largely focused on the Western, and I want you to be thinking about how culture might influence how we think about kids, and what other possibilities might be for how it might be for kids, and how we might parent kids. All right, so I want to make some general points about child development. First of all, the human child and person is built to relate to others. You guys are in college in America, as we just talked about. America is a place that values independence and people being able to kind of do things for themselves compared to collectivist societies. So you probably learned and have some sense of that it's important for you to be independent people. You might feel like you're pretty independent, and you are. But the truth is, and this is kind of a philosophical and even religious question that philosophers and religious theologians have talked about, is are we separate? All of us? Are we just a bunch of columns, like independent columns that aren't connected? Or are we kind of naturally made to be in communion with each other, to use kind of a religious term, or to be kind of more collective? And the answer is that we are built in ways to be collectivist and to be kind of connected to each other. True or false? Among the senses, sight is most fully developed at birth. Sight is most fully developed at birth. False. Touch is most fully developed at birth. And why might touch be most fully developed at birth? Yeah. That's right. You think of the Animal Planet. You see the gorillas walking around and the little baby gorillas holding on tight. Well, humans share a lot of our DNA with chimpanzees and others, and we have it in us as well to hold on. And that's a survival thing. What else? Why else might be touch so fully developed at birth? That's right. It's a reflex we have called the rooting reflex, where you go like this and the infant goes like this because it thinks it's the mom's nipple. So it moves towards it. So there's ways in which touch is good for us evolutionarily, and especially for the first example, it's not just touch, but it's like hugs. It's like grabbing on. Now, you might have heard the phrase get 12 hugs a day for a healthier lifestyle. I don't think that study has been done that I know of, but if it was done, I can guarantee you that it would be true. That tactile stimulation, that throughout life, is something that is emotionally, not just emotionally, but also in terms of other kind of stimulation. It used to be thought that prenatal babies, you leave them alone, kind of diminish the stimulation to make it acceptable to them. But now it's changing some so that a moderate level of stimulation is good. Tactile touching stimulation and other kinds of stimulation actually, in terms of brain growth, can kind of elicit brain growth. So that kind of touch is a good thing for us in terms of how we grow and in terms of happiness. We're kind of built to touch each other and to enjoy that kind of sensation. Psych 100, you probably talked about Harry Harlow. Classic studies, experimenters separated infant rhesus monkeys at 1 day of age from the mothers. With which fake surrogate mother did the infant monkey spend more time? That's right, the terry cloth. So it was really a study to look at feeding, and is feeding the thing that attracts a kid to the mom, as Freud suggested, that the mom provides food for the kid, and that's why the kid wants to hold on to mom. Well, does anybody remember the hours a day that the kid spent with the food mother versus the terry cloth mother? Guesses? 1 hour with the feeding food bottle, 17 to 18 hours a day with the terry cloth mother that it liked to hold on to. So, it certainly needs to get its food, but in terms of understanding the connection between an infant and the mom, it's much more than food. That once the food is satisfied, nurturance is satisfied, the kid wants to hang out and get that kind of calming influence. Nature matters. Point number 2. Meaning nature versus nurture. I think there's a tendency for many people to want to emphasize that nurture matters, what parenting, how our kind of environment we set up for our kid matters, and it does. But it is also the case that nature or genes matter. Nature matters. Genes, to some extent, determine who we are, the unfolding of genes, that is. In measurements of intelligence, identical twins become more what to one another as they move through adolescence, and fraternal twins become more what? Guesses? C. C. That's right. And what that? So identical twins having 100% DNA in common, fraternal twins having half. So there's a sense in which some people suggest that kind of genes unfold over time, or nature, that we become kind of what our genes want us to become or we tend to over time. And we're going to talk about this next week in detail. But the idea is that, over time, especially once we get out of the kind of tight grip that our parents have on us when we're little kids, like we move into adolescence, that, if you're born with a smart gene, you're going to slowly, you're going to enjoy hanging out with smart people a little bit more than non-smart people. It's going to make more of a difference to you than it does to maybe somebody else to hang out with smart people. And so that slowly you kind of build, and maybe you're in AP classes, it's advanced placement classes or whatever it's called, and so you're hanging out with those people. So that over time, and then maybe you get into a better college, more competitive college in terms of GPA. And then all of a sudden you're hanging out in this whole new culture where all of a sudden, studying the library is a little bit cooler than it is at some other university. So you're kind of, the genes are unfolding in terms of setting up the environment in which you exist, which you choose to live in. And it's not like you're entirely choosing this, but kind of over time it kind of does that. But same thing with personality traits like extroversion or introversion. If you tend to be more extroverted by temperament, you get into high school, you're going to probably be more likely to go to parties and do other kind of social things. At the same time you're doing that, you're placing yourself in an environment of a lot of extroverted people. So the models of how to be are kind of reinforcing themselves. So that, so over time there's a sense in which our genes kind of unfold, and we never perfectly reach them, and it's kind of limited to what I'm talking about. There's limits to how much that's true, but there is a sense in which over time we're kind of covering, a psychologist, Donald Winnicott, called it the true self, kind of unfolding of the true self over time. True or false? Even at 2 years of age, children show gender-related preferences for toys. True. Again, so gender differences, there does seem to be biological components. Certainly it's strongly socialized into in terms of how parents and teachers train us. But there does seem to be gender differences in preferences at an early point in life. In a study by Sadden and Magnuson, girls who reach puberty earlier than other girls more likely use alcohol and drugs and shoplifting. True or false? True. Timing of puberty, which also has become, I was talking about before, biological unfolding is related to genes, or tends to be related to genes. Why might this be true? Guesses? Yeah.
Because those girls tended to associate themselves with older adolescents. Maybe they were influenced by them, peer pressure?
Yeah, and particularly boys.
Right.
You think of the girl in 7th grade who's more fully developed than, say, another girl. Might get more attention from the boys in 8th and 9th grade than other girls do. And some of those boys in 8th and 9th grade might not be the boys you want your daughter hanging out with. But so it's not, it's not like completely in every case it's the case. But if you look at a population of all the girls in like a county or something or a state, this is going to tend to be true, that reaching puberty earlier, there's going to be at least a subset of the girls that has some bad consequences for them because of who they start associating with. And let's stop there. We'll pick up Monday.